The rain came down in sheets that November morning. Cold, relentless, the kind of rain that soaks through your coat in seconds and chills you to the bone. Margaret stood outside the palace gates, her hands trembling. Not from the cold, from something else entirely. She had traveled 300 miles to be here. 3 buses. A train that smelled like old coffee and regret. All to see her son for just a few minutes. To see him standing in that uniform she'd only seen in photographs. But now, staring at the towering gates and the stone-faced guards, she realized she had no idea what to do next. The tourists around her snapped photos, laughing and pointing. They treated this place like a theme park. But for Margaret, this was everything. Her boy was somewhere behind those walls, standing at attention. Serving his country, she took a step forward, then stopped. A guard stood perfectly still near the gate, tall, rigid, eyes forward. He didn't blink, didn't move. It was like looking at a statue that somehow breathed. Margaret's heart pounded. Should she ask him? Would he even be allowed to speak to her? Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps us bring you more emotional, true stories like this one. Now back to Margaret. She clutched her worn handbag tighter. Inside was a small package wrapped in brown paper. A scarf she'd knitted for Thomas, her son. Her only child. The last time she'd seen him was 6 months ago. The day he left for training, he'd looked so young in his civilian clothes, his face smooth and hopeful. Now, he was part of something bigger. Something she didn't fully understand. A woman bumped into Margaret, nearly knocking her over. The tourist didn't even apologize. Just kept walking, camera raised, chasing the perfect shot. Margaret steadied herself against the wet metal barrier. Her vision blurred for a moment. The medication made her dizzy sometimes. The doctor had warned her about traveling this far, about the stress on her heart. But some things were more important than doctor's orders. She looked up at the guard again. He hadn't moved. Not even a millimeter. How did they do that? How did they stand so still while the world moved around them? "Excuse me?" she whispered. Nothing. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. She tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me, sir. I need help." The guard's eyes remained fixed on some distant point. His face showed nothing. No emotion. No recognition that she'd even spoken. Margaret felt her throat tighten. The rain ran down her face, mixing with something warmer. She blinked rapidly. This was a mistake. Come in here. Thinking she could just show up and see him. The military had rules, protocols. Things a simple woman from a small town didn't understand. She started to turn away. Then she heard it. A voice, low, barely audible over the rain. Don't move. Stay exactly where you are. It was the guard. His lips had barely moved. His posture hadn't changed at all. But the words were clear. Margaret froze. In 30 seconds, the voice continued. A guard in the red jacket will approach from your left. Tell him you're here to see your son. Tell him the name. He'll know what to do. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Who was this guard? How did he know she was here for her son? The seconds ticked by. Margaret counted them in her head. 25, 26, 20-7. Then she saw him. A guard in a red ceremonial jacket walking with purpose through the crowd. Coming straight toward her. Margaret's hands shook as she gripped the package tighter. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything, but she had no idea what was about to unfold. The guard in red stopped directly in front of her. Up close, he looked younger than she'd expected. Maybe his face was serious but not unkind. "You're here to see someone?" he asked quietly. Margaret nodded, her voice catching. "My son, Thomas Pemberton. He's one of the guards here." The young guard's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition? Maybe. Or sympathy. "Follow me, ma'am." "Stay close, and don't stop walking." He turned and began moving through the crowd. Margaret hurried after him, her shoes splashing through puddles. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but everything was still wet and gray. They walked along the perimeter of the palace. past tourists taking selfies, past street vendors selling miniature flags and keychains. The guard moved with purpose, and Margaret struggled to keep up. Her chest felt tight. Each breath came a little harder than the last. Not much further, the guard said without looking back. It was like he could sense her struggling. They turned a corner away from the main crowd. The noise faded. Here the street was quieter. Just a few people scattered about. The guard stopped at a small gate Margaret hadn't noticed before. It was plain, unmarked, easy to miss if you didn't know it was there. He pulled out a radio and spoke into it. Numbers, codes, things. Margaret didn't understand. A moment later, the gate buzzed and clicked open. "Through here," he said. Holding it for her, Margaret stepped through, and the gate closed behind them with a heavy thunk. The sound made her jump. They were in a narrow corridor now. Stone walls on both sides. The temperature dropped immediately. It was like stepping into a different world. "Where are we going?" Margaret asked, her voice echoing slightly. "Somewhere private," the guard replied. "The guards rotate shifts every 2 hours. Your son is scheduled to come off duty in 15 minutes. We can't interrupt a post, but we can arrange for you to see him during his break." Margaret's heart soared. After traveling all day, after all the worry and uncertainty, she was going to see Thomas in just 15 minutes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." The guard glanced back at her. His expression softened just slightly. "I have a mom too. I know what it means." They walked deeper into the corridor. The walls here were old. Really old. Margaret could see the marks of centuries in the stone. This place had witnessed history. Wars, coronations, secrets, and now, somehow, she was part of it. They emerged into a small courtyard. It was enclosed on all sides, hidden from public view. A few wooden benches sat against one wall. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving everything glistening and clean. "You can wait here," the guard said. "I'll send word to your son. He'll come when his rotation ends." Margaret sat down on one of the benches. The wood was damp, but she didn't care. Her legs were grateful for the rest. What if... She started, then hesitated. What if he can't come? What if there's some rule or he'll come? The guard interrupted gently. "Trust me. No guard would miss the chance to see his mother." He turned to leave, then paused. "The man who helped you at the gate. The one who told you to wait? That was Sergeant Cole. He's been here 18 years. He never breaks protocol, never speaks to tourists. But he made an exception for you." "Why?" Margaret asked. The guard smiled for the first time. It transformed his face completely, made him look like somebody's son instead of a soldier, 'cause 6 months ago his own mother passed away. Heart attack. She'd been planning to visit him, but she waited too long. She never got to see him in uniform. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. Her hand went to her chest, where her own heart fluttered irregularly beneath her coat. "He saw you standing there in the rain," the guard continued. "Saw the way you were looking at the palace, and he just ... knew. He knew you were someone's mother, and he knew how much it mattered." Margaret couldn't speak. Tears filled her eyes, blurring the courtyard into soft shapes and shadows. The guard gave a small nod and walked away, his footsteps echoing off the ancient stones, and Margaret sat alone in the hidden courtyard, clutching a package wrapped in brown paper, waiting to see the son she'd traveled so far to find. The minutes ticked by, slow, endless. Then she heard footsteps. Running footsteps. Someone was coming. Thomas appeared in the archway, still in his full uniform. The bearskin hat was gone, but he wore the red tunic and dark trousers. His boots shone despite the rain. He stopped when he saw her. Just stopped completely, as if someone had pressed pause on him. "Ma'am," his voice cracked on the word. Margaret stood up too fast. The world tilted slightly, but she steadied herself against the bench. "Thomas," then he was moving, crossing the courtyard in long strides. And suddenly, her son was right there, towering over her. When had he gotten so tall? When had his shoulders gotten so broad? He wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if she might break, and maybe she might. Her bones felt fragile these days. Everything felt fragile. But in that moment, held by her son, she felt stronger than she had in months. "What are you doing here?" Thomas asked, pulling back to look at her. His eyes scanned her face, taking in every detail. "You should have told me you were coming. I would have arranged. I wanted to surprise you," Margaret said. She was crying now, not even trying to hide it. "I needed to see you." Thomas's jaw tightened. He glanced away for a moment, composing himself. When he looked back, his eyes were wet too. "How did you even get in here?" "This area is restricted. A guard helped me. Sergeant Cole. And another one in red who brought me here." Margaret touched her son's face. His cheek was rough with stubble. They were very kind. Thomas nodded slowly. "Cole is my commanding officer. He's a good man." They sat down together on the bench. Thomas kept one arm around his mother's shoulders, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "Tell me everything," he said. "How have you been? How's the house? How's your health?" Margaret waved a hand dismissively. "I'm fine. Don't fuss. I want to hear about you, about this." She gestured at his uniform. About all of this, so Thomas told her. About the training that had been harder than anything he'd ever done. About the pride he felt when he first put on the uniform. About standing watch in the freezing cold and the burning heat. About the discipline, the brotherhood, purpose. "It's not what I expected," he admitted. "It's better. I feel like I'm part of something important, something bigger than myself." Margaret listened, her heart swelling. This was her boy, the same child who used to bring her dandelions from the garden, who cried when he scraped his knees, who stayed up late doing homework at the kitchen table while she folded laundry. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man, a soldier, a guardian. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Thomas's arm tightened around her. "I never could have done any of this without you, Mom. Everything I am, everything I've become, it's because of you." Margaret shook her head, but she was smiling through her tears. "Don't be silly. You did this yourself." "No." Thomas's voice was firm. "When Dad left, you could have given up. You could have let things fall apart, but you didn't. You worked 2 jobs. You made sure I had everything I needed. You believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." He pulled the package from her hands. The brown paper was soft from the rain in her grip.
"What's this?"
he asked. "Open it." Thomas unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a scarf, dark blue, thick wool. The stitches were uneven in places, but it was made with love. That much was obvious. "For winter watch," Margaret explained. "I know you have regulation scarves, but I thought maybe during off hours." "It's perfect," Thomas said quietly. He wrapped it around his neck immediately. "I'll wear it every chance I get." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The courtyard was peaceful, protected from the world outside. Then Thomas spoke again, and his voice was different, worried. "Ma'am, you shouldn't have traveled this far, not with your heart. What did the doctor say?" Margaret looked away. "The doctor says a lot of things." "Mom, Thomas, I'm fine. I just wanted to see you. Is that so terrible?" "No," but he stopped, started again. "You're not telling me something? I can tell." Margaret took a breath. This was the moment she'd been dreading. The real reason she'd come? "The medication isn't working as well anymore," she said quietly. "They want to try something new, but it's expensive. And there are risks." Thomas went very still beside her. "What kind of risks?" "The kind that made me realize I needed to see you. Now, not next month. Not when it was more convenient, now." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, terrible. Thomas stood up abruptly. He walked a few steps away, his hands clenched into fists, his shoulders shook. "How long?" he asked, his back still turned. "They don't know. Could be years, could be months." "That's why I came, Thomas. I couldn't wait anymore." He turned back to her. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed him. They were the eyes of a frightened child. "I should come home. I can request leave." "I can know." Margaret stood too, walking to him. "No, you will do no such thing. This is where you belong. This is your life now. You're my life," Thomas said, his voice breaking. Margaret pulled him down into another hug. This time she was the one holding him together. And in that hidden courtyard, a mother and son held each other while the world moved on without them. The sound of boots on stone broke the moment. Both Margaret and Thomas turned to see Sergeant Cole entering the courtyard. He'd changed out of his ceremonial uniform into regular military dress. Without the bearskin and formal attire, he looked different, more human, more approachable. "Pemberton," he said with a nod. Then, "To Margaret, ma'am." Thomas straightened immediately, wiping his face with the back of his hand.
"Sir."
"At ease, soldier." Cole walked closer, his eyes kind but assessing. He looked at Margaret the way a doctor might look at a patient, seeing more than most people would. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said to her. "But I wanted to check that you were all right. It's a long journey from—" He paused, raising an eyebrow at Thomas. "Yorkshire, sir," Thomas supplied. "Small town called Hebdon Bridge." "Long journey," Cole repeated. He studied Margaret for another moment, then seemed to make a decision. "I've arranged for you to have tea in the officers' mess, somewhere warm. Somewhere dry. You shouldn't be sitting out here in the cold." "That's very kind," Margaret said, "but I don't want to impose." "I'm sure there are rules about visitors." "There are always rules," Cole interrupted gently. "But there are also exceptions. And mothers who travel 300 miles to see their sons qualify as exceptions in my book." He gestured toward the archway. "Shall we?" They followed him through another series of corridors. These were different from before, warmer, better lit. They passed other soldiers, who nodded respectfully at Cole and gave Thomas curious glances. The officers' mess was a comfortable room with dark wood paneling and deep leather chairs. A fire crackled in the fireplace, chasing away the November chill. It smelled like coffee and old books. "Sit anywhere you like," Cole said. "I'll have tea brought in." He disappeared, leaving Margaret and Thomas alone again. They chose a sofa near the fire, and Margaret immediately felt the warmth seeping into her bones. "This is incredible," she said, looking around. "I never imagined. I've never been in here," Thomas admitted. "This is for officers and their guests. I'm just a guardsman." "You're not just anything," Margaret said firmly. A young woman in military uniform appeared with a tea service. She set it on the low table in front of them with practiced efficiency, smiled politely, and left without a word. Margaret poured tea for both of them, her hands steadier now that she was warm and sitting with her son. Thomas took his cup, cradling it between his palms. "Tell me about Sergeant Cole," Margaret said. "He seems different." Thomas nodded. "He's the best commanding officer anyone could ask for. Tough but fair. He expects perfection, but he also understands we're human." He paused, stirring his tea absently. "I heard about his mother." "Everyone did." He took 1 day of leave for the funeral, then came right back to duty. Never talked about it, never showed any emotion. But you could tell something had changed in him. "Grief does that," Margaret said softly. "It changes you from the inside out." They drank their tea in silence for a moment. The fire popped and hissed. Outside the windows, the afternoon light was already starting to fade. November days were so short. "When do you have to go back on duty?" Margaret asked. Thomas checked his watch. "I have 2 hours. My next rotation starts at 6. 2 hours, it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was more than Margaret had hoped for when she'd boarded that first bus this morning, in the dark. "Then let's not waste a single minute," she said. So they talked. Really talked. About everything and nothing. Thomas told her about the other guards, about the pranks they pulled on each other during downtime, about the tourists who tried to make them laugh or flinch, about the dignity of standing watch while history happened around them. Margaret told him about the neighbors, about Mrs. Chin's new puppy that barked at everything, about the roof leak she'd finally gotten fixed, about the community garden where she'd planted bulbs that would bloom in spring. She didn't tell him. About the nights she spent awake, her heart racing for no reason. About the pills lined up on her bedside table, about the fear that crept in during the quiet moments. Some things a mother didn't share with her son, some burdens she carried alone. Cole returned after about an hour, carried a folder under his arm and wore a thoughtful expression. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, "but I have something I'd like to discuss with both of you." Thomas stood immediately. "Sit down, Pemberton. This isn't formal." "Oh." Cole settled into a chair across from them. He opened the folder and pulled out several papers. "I've been thinking," he said, looking at Margaret, "about your situation, about the distance between you and your son." He glanced at Thomas. "Ain't about the fact that Pemberton here is one of the finest young soldiers I've had the privilege to command." Thomas's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. "There's a program," Cole continued, "not widely known. It provides accommodation for immediate family members of guards in exceptional circumstances. There's a small flat, nothing fancy, but it's 10 minutes from here, available for up to 6 months. Margaret's heart skipped. "I don't understand." "What I'm saying, ma'am, is that if you wanted to spend time closer to your son, we could make that happen. You'd need to apply through the proper channels, of course, and there would be paperwork, but I can expedite the process." He looked directly at her, and Margaret saw the pain in his eyes, the regret, the wish that he could turn back time and give his own mother what he was offering her now. "Why would you do this?" she asked quietly. "Because I can," Cole said simply. "And because someone should." The room fell silent. Margaret looked at Thomas, who looked back at her with hope and fear warring in his expression. "I can't accept charity," Margaret said finally. "It's not charity," Cole replied. "It's military housing. You'd be expected to pay a small rental fee. And there are rules, guidelines. But it's real. It's legitimate." He slid the papers across the table toward her. "Think about it. Talk to your son. But if you're interested, I'll need to know by tomorrow morning." Then he stood, gave them both a nod, and left the room. Margaret stared at the papers. Her hands trembled as she reached for them. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her, but the papers were solid in her hands. Official, with seals and signatures. "Ma'am," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "you could stay. We could have dinner together. I could check on you. We could actually spend time together." Margaret looked at her son, at his hopeful face, at the scarf she'd knitted still wrapped around his neck, and she thought about going home to an empty house, about taking her pills alone, about counting down the days until her heart finally gave up, or she could stay here, close to her son. For however much time she had left, the choice should have been impossible, but somehow was the easiest decision she'd ever made. 3 weeks later, Margaret stood in the small flat, hanging curtains she'd brought from home. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making the simple space feel warm and alive. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a compact kitchen, a living area with a sofa that had seen better days. But it was clean, safe, and it was 10 minutes from her son. The move had happened faster than she'd thought possible. Cole had been true to his word, pushing the paperwork through channels that normally took months. Mrs. Chen had helped pack up the house back in Yorkshire. The neighbors had thrown her a small going-away party. Pretending it was temporary, even though they all knew it might not be, Margaret had said goodbye to her doctor, who'd arranged for her care to transfer to a hospital in London. New doctors, new faces. Same failing heart, but she didn't think about that now. She thought about the fact that Thomas was coming for dinner tonight. Their first proper meal together since he'd joined the Guard. She'd spent the morning shopping at the local market. And now a chicken roasted in the oven was filling the flat with smells of home, herbs, butter, comfort. A knock at the door startled her. She glanced at the clock. Too early for Thomas. When she opened the door, she found Sergeant Cole standing in the hallway. He wore civilian-clothes jeans and a jumper and carried a potted plant. "Sergeant Cole," she said, surprised. "Please, come in." "It's just Cole when I'm off duty," he said, stepping inside. He held out the plant, looking slightly awkward. "Housewarming gift. I'm told it's hard to kill." "I thought that was important information."
Margaret
laughed, taking the plant. It was a peace lily, its white blooms bright against deep green leaves. "It's lovely." "Thank you." She set it on the windowsill, then turned back to him. "Can I offer you tea?" "I'm afraid I don't have much yet, but tea would be nice," Cole said. They settled at the small kitchen table, mugs of tea between them. Outside the window, London moved and breathed. Cars, buses, people rushing to unknown destinations. "I wanted to check on you," Cole said after a moment. "Make sure you're settling in all right." "Make sure you have everything you need." "I'm fine," Margaret assured him. Everyone has been so welcoming. The lady next door brought me bread this morning. The man downstairs helped me carry up my suitcases. Cole nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. And your health. You've found a new doctor? I have an appointment next week. Margaret studied him. Why are you really here, Cole? He looked up, and she saw the truth in his eyes. The guilt. The grief. The desperate need to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I couldn't help my mother, he said quietly. She kept saying she'd visit, that she'd come see me in uniform. But she was always waiting for the perfect time. When the weather was better, when she felt stronger, when life was less busy, paused. And then she died. And I realized there is no perfect time. There's only now. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. You didn't fail her, didn't I? His voice was rough. I should have gone to her. Should have insisted. Should have made time. You were doing your duty. She understood that. Mothers always understand. Margaret squeezed his hand. And you're honoring her now? By helping me. By giving me these months with Thomas, you're making sure another mother doesn't have regrets. Cole's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly, composing himself. He's a good lad, your Thomas. One of the best I've ever trained. Speaks highly of you, too. They finished their tea, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Cole told her about the neighborhood, the best places to shop, the park where she could sit and watch the world go by, the cafe that made proper Yorkshire tea. Before he left, he paused at the door. If you need anything at all, you call me. Thomas has my number, I will, Margaret promised. After he left, she returned to the kitchen. The chicken was ready, golden and perfect. She set the table with care, using the nice plates she'd packed. 2 settings, mother and son. When Thomas arrived, still in uniform, but with his cap tucked under his arm, his face lit up at the smell. Is that your roast chicken? He asked, grinning like a boy. With all the trimmings, Margaret confirmed. They ate together at the small table, and it felt like home. More than the flat in Yorkshire had felt in years. Because home wasn't a place. It was the people you loved. Thomas told her about his day. About the tourist who'd proposed to his girlfriend right in front of his post. About the child who'd saluted him with such serious determination that it took everything. Thomas had not to smile. Margaret told him about meeting the neighbors. About the peace lily from Cole. About how strange and wonderful it felt to be in London. After dinner, Thomas helped her wash up. They stood side by side at the sink, just like they used to when he was young. When the kitchen in Yorkshire had been their whole world, Mom, Thomas said as he dried a plate, I need to tell you something. Margaret's hand stilled in the soapy water. The tone of his voice sent a chill through her. I've been recommended for promotion, he continued, to Lance Corporal. It's a good thing. A great thing, actually. He set down the plate. But it means more responsibility. Longer hours? More time away. Thomas? That's wonderful, Margaret said, meaning it. You should be proud, I am, but... He turned to face her fully. I'm worried about leaving you alone too much, especially if your health gets worse. Margaret dried her hands and cupped her son's face. Listen to me. You will take that promotion. You will do your duty. And you will not worry about me. I'm stronger than I look. But no buts. I didn't move here to hold you back. I moved here to be close to you. To see you when I can. To know you're living your life fully. She smiled. That's all any mother wants. To know her child is thriving. Thomas pulled her into a hug, and they stood there in the small kitchen, holding each other while the London night pressed against the windows. I love you, ma'am, he whispered. I love you too, my boy, always. Neither of them knew it then, but that moment, that simple, perfect moment would become the memory Thomas held on to in the difficult times ahead. Because 3 days later, everything changed. Margaret woke in the darkness, her chest tight. Wrong. Something was wrong. The pain spread from her center outward, radiating down her arm. The room spun. She reached for the phone on her bedside table, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. The phone fell to the floor with a clatter. Margaret tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. The walls of the small flat seemed to press in around her. She was alone. Completely alone. No, not alone. The lady next door. What was her name? Sarah. Sarah with the kind smile and the bread. Margaret rolled to the edge of the bed. The floor was so far away. She slid down, her knees hitting the carpet. The pain was blinding now. She crawled, inches at a time, toward the front door. If she could just reach it, just open it. Someone would hear. Someone would help. Her vision darkened at the edges. The door seemed a mile away. Then she heard it. A key in the lock. The door opening. Mum. Thomas's voice. But it couldn't be. He was on duty, wasn't he? Strong arms lifted her. Her son's face swam into view above her. I've got you, he said. I've got you. Then everything went black. Margaret woke to the steady beep of hospital monitors. White ceiling. Antiseptic smell. The pressure of Thomas's hand holding hers, Mom. His face appeared over her, exhausted and scared. Oh, thank God. Don't try to talk. Just rest. But she had to know. How? How did you... I forgot my scarf, Thomas said, his voice breaking. The one you made me. I came back to get it before my shift. Found the door locked, but heard something inside. His grip on her hand tightened. If I hadn't come back, if I'd been 5 minutes later... The doctor appeared then, a woman with gray hair and gentle eyes. She explained what Margaret already knew. The medication had failed. Her heart was giving up. They could try surgery, but it was risky. Very risky. How long without surgery? Margaret asked. The doctor hesitated. Months, maybe weeks. It's hard to say, and with surgery, if it's successful, years. But there's a 30% chance you won't survive the operation. Margaret looked at Thomas. At his young face marked with fear and love and desperation. I'll do the surgery, she said. Ma'am, no. It's too dangerous. And what's the alternative? Margaret asked. I watch you worry every day. I make you choose between your duty and sitting by my bedside. She shook her head. No, I'll take the chance. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. The days before it crawled by in a blur of tests and paperwork, and long conversations with Thomas Cole visited every day. He'd bring books, newspapers, stories from the palace. He'd sit with her when Thomas couldn't, filling the room with quiet company. You're a good man, Margaret, told him one afternoon. I'm trying to be, Cole replied. The night before the surgery, Thomas sat by her bed long after visiting hours ended. No one dared tell him to leave. I'm scared, he admitted. I can't lose you? You won't, Margaret said, trying to sound certain. I've survived worse than this. I raised you as a single mother, didn't I? And you turned out to be a royal guard. Clearly, I'm made of tough stuff. Thomas laughed despite his tears. You're the strongest person I know. Then trust me to fight. Margaret touched his face. But if something goes wrong, don't. Listen to me. If something goes wrong, you keep living. You take that promotion. You serve with honor. You find someone to love. You have children, and tell them about their stubborn grandmother who traveled 300 miles in the rain just to see their father. Her voice was fierce now. You don't stop living because I stop? Promise me. Ma'am, promise me. Thomas, I promise, he whispered. They sat in silence until dawn broke over London. Then the nurses came to prepare her for surgery. Thomas kissed her forehead and was gently ushered out. Margaret was wheeled down long corridors toward the operating theater. The ceiling tiles passed overhead, one after another. White, endless. She thought about her life. The good parts and the hard parts. The moments that mattered and the ones that didn't. And she realized she had no regrets. Not anymore. She'd seen her son in uniform. She'd held him in her arms. She'd made him dinner in a warm flat in London. She'd given him everything she had to give. The rest was just extra time. Borrowed moments. And if this was where her story ended, at least it ended with love. The anesthesia began to pull her under. Voices faded. The world grew soft and distant. Her last thought was of Thomas. Always Thomas. 12 hours later, Margaret opened her eyes. The surgery was over, and somehow, impossibly, she was still here. Thomas was asleep in the chair beside her bed, still in his uniform. He looked peaceful, young, like the boy he'd been before the world asked him to be a man. Margaret watched him breathe, in and out, steady and sure. The doctor had said it would take weeks to know if the surgery was truly successful. But Margaret knew. She could feel it. A steadiness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She was going to live. Not forever. Nobody lived forever, but longer. Long enough to matter. Thomas stirred, his eyes opening. When he saw her awake, his face transformed. Joy, relief, love so pure it hurt to witness. "You did it," he said, his voice raw. "You actually did it." "I told you I was tough," Margaret said with a weak smile. He laughed and cried at the same time, holding her hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. And outside the hospital window, London continued its eternal rhythm. Buses and cars and people rushing past. But inside this room, time stood still. A mother and son, together, alive, grateful for every borrowed moment. 3 months later, Margaret stood in the crowd outside the palace. Strong enough now to walk, to breathe, to live. She watched her son at his post, tall, proud, unmoving as the world rushed around him, and when his shift ended, when he came to find her in their usual spot, she would tell him about the new medication that was working, about the doctor who was amazed at her recovery, about the months and maybe years they had ahead of them. But for now, she just watched. A mother who'd traveled 300 miles in the rain, who'd been helped through gates and protocols by strangers who understood the language of love. And she smiled, because sometimes, when you're brave enough to chase what matters, the world opens doors you never knew existed. Thomas caught her eye across the crowd. His face remained stern, professional, but she saw it. The smallest nod, the briefest acknowledgement. "I see you, ma'am. I see you too, my boy." And that, Margaret thought, was everything. That was enough. That was home.